Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban is considered by many fans to be the best movie in the Harry Potter franchise.
And surprisingly, from this point on, things start to become much more different from the books.
Sorcerer's Stone and Chamber of Secrets, although they do have some differences and some cuts, still remain more faithful.
But Prisoner of Azkaban already changes a lot of things. And today I'm going to show you some of the many differences in Prisoner of Azkaban.
And show how a movie, which is an adaptation of a book, of a work, can still be very good, even with a lot of differences, even without faithfully following what's written in the book. Hey there, wizards. How's it going? I think one of the biggest questions for book fans, when that book gets adapted,
is, will they follow what's in the book? Will they do it the same way? Will they keep all the moments I want them to keep?
Most of the time, no, it won't be the same. There will be differences, because it's an adaptation. That happens often with Harry Potter, right? There are many moments we wanted to see in the movies that just aren't there. They were simply cut out, left aside.
But the idea of today's episode isn't to show the things that were left out in a way that's, lamenting that they're missing.
It's really just out of curiosity, so we can notice the big difference there. As I compared the movie to the book, I was taking notes by chapter as I reread the book to make this script. And then I compare them with the movie. Right at the beginning of the movie, we see Harry doing Lumos there, which is a homework assignment. That already contradicts the story, because you can't do magic outside of school. But in the original story, in the book, when it starts, Harry is writing an essay about the witch hunts. He's using a flashlight. He's not doing magic. No, he's got a book there, studying and writing an essay. And another very important thing is that Harry's materials aren't available to him. In the movie, right? We see that Harry has his trunk there in the movie. When he runs away, he leaves, grabs the trunk and takes it with him. But the reality is that in the book, his materials, his broomstick, even his wand, are locked up under the cupboard, which used to be his room. There's also a moment at the beginning where it narrates how some of Harry's summer vacation days went in the book. And there's a moment when it's said that Ron calls him on the phone, yelling, talking to Uncle Walter, asking about Harry Potter, and Walter gets really mad about it and says not to call there anymore, and then Harry gets in a bit of trouble because of that. Another cool detail is that Harry used to hide things under a loose floorboard in his room. So, he used to hide books, things related to magic, even some food as well. That's really cool. I wish I had seen it. It's a silly thing, but I wish I had seen it because it reinforces how bad the Dursleys are to him. The book starts on Harry's birthday, right? On his birthday, he was writing his essay and didn't even realize he had already turned 13 an hour ago, and then he's just there and all.
He gets kind of upset that he hadn't received any letters. Nothing yet, right?
And then 3 owls arrive at the window. Edwidge, Errol, and another owl from Hogwarts. And this owl brings him gifts, brings a present from Hermione. She sends a broom maintenance kit. Ron sends a pocket sneakoscope that he bought in Egypt on the trip they're taking there.
And Hagrid sends cake and stuff, and also a monstrous book of monsters. Harry already gets the book there, right?
And he opens it. The book tries to bite him. He straps the book with a belt. So this happens right at the very beginning of the book, while Harry is on Privet Drive. And then Errol arrives, actually passed out. Hedwig and the other owl are carrying her, and both of them stay there, resting. Hedwig is resting in the cage, and Errol is there too, to recover.
And the Hogwarts owl comes back there and leaves.
On TV, while Uncle Vernon is watching the news, Harry hears them talking about a dangerous fugitive, someone named Black, who had escaped from a maximum security prison. He was so dangerous that they even announced it to the Muggles. And Vernon gets mad because they don't say where he came from, right? They don't say, and he asks, why tell us where the guy escaped from? He could be right outside my door or on my street, and I'd never know. And then, all those events happen during a period that's not shown in the movie, because it only shows Harry doing magic. Then Vernon comes to see what's going on. He pretends he's sleeping, does it again, goes back. Anyway, he's sleeping. And then it cuts to the next day. Aunt Marge arrives, and Harry goes to ask Vernon to sign the form when she's already entered the house.
But in the book, Harry asks Walter much earlier, and Walter tells Harry that he would have to come up with a story.
That he was enrolled at St. Brutus's, which was an institution for irrefutable cases.
Which is even mentioned in the movie, but it doesn't show this bargaining between Vernon and Harry Harry blackmailing Vernon.
He says something like, well, it's going to be hard for me to remember this story, to keep this name, right? With Aunt Marge here. If you don't sign the form, I might forget and end up saying something about my real school.
And Vernon is like that, right? Then Vernon even says, if you do that, I'll tear you to pieces.
And then Harry replies to him that, well, tearing me to pieces won't make Guida forget what she's going to end up finding out.
So Harry kind of blackmails Walter. That's a part I like. I like when things start for Harry. From the moment he learns he's a wizard, when he finds out he's a wizard. That's a turning point right there in the first book. And he starts to answer back, to stand up to the Dursleys, you know?
This blackmail thing is cool, and unfortunately, it doesn't show up in the movie, right? Harry just says, oh, it's fine if she behaves, but it's not really blackmail at that point yet.
There, Aunt Marge stays for a week at the Dursleys' house, and then Harry goes there, hides his things under the floorboard, puts them away, because if Aunt Marge went into his room, it had to look as normal as possible. Imagine if she found a book with wizard stuff or something like that, so he hides everything under that floorboard, and then Harry inflates her, right? He ends up losing control and inflates Aunt Marge, right? Which, in the movie, seems to happen on the same day she arrives. But, like I said, she actually stays at Walter's house for a week. From the first day, she makes Harry's life miserable, and by the third day, he nearly loses control. And it's on the sixth day, when she was about to leave, that she manages to make Harry lose it. That's when his patience runs out and Harry makes her blow up, right? In the movie, she flies off into the sky, and in the book, she floats up to the ceiling of the living room. That's it. But there's something cool. Remember I said that Harry's things are locked up in the cupboard under the stairs? After he makes Aunt Marge inflate, he's so nervous, he's so angry. He just wants to get out of there that he goes straight to the cupboard. He stops at the cupboard door, and the door just swings open in front of him like that, with magic, even though it was locked.
He not only inflates his aunt, but also magically breaks open the door instantly, without thinking.
It wasn't something intentional. You know, of course, he wanted to get his things, but he didn't cast a spell to open the door. The door opened with magic because he was on edge.
While in the movie, he goes there, goes up to the room, right, kicks, grabs the big suitcase, right, leaves and threatens Uncle Walter.
He even tells Walter, no, that's enough for me, I'm leaving. It's similar to what happens in the movie, right?
But the difference is where his things are and how he gets picked up, which I think is a considerable difference. There, right? When Harry calls the night bus, or night bus, right? He calls it by accident, and he calls the night bus because he sees it.
He has the impression that he saw a big dog there among the bushes, near the house, right? And he uses Lumos. He uses the Lumos spell to light up his wand and illuminate there. But the act of him casting the spell, raising his wand.
There at the curb, he calls the night bus. So he accidentally calls it like, of course, in the movie.
I don't know if people have that perception. I don't, because I read the book before the movie. So for me, it was clear.
He called the night bus. But some people think he just fell and the night bus happened to arrive and saved him. Harry knows about that imminent danger, but it's not like that. Another detail is that it seems like the night bus in the movie is free, right? Harry just gets there, like, okay. He gets on the bus and goes wherever he wants, but you actually have to pay for it, if I'm not mistaken. 12 sickles for the night bus fare. And he even gets a hot chocolate and a toothbrush. In the movie, the night bus is a bit similar to how it is in the book, with all that conversation and everything. The only thing is that Harry doesn't reveal who he is in the movie, but in the book, he still lies.
He says that he was Neville Longbottom, that his name was Neville Longbottom, when Stan Shunpike asks who he was. Of course, he had the feeling that he was being chased because he had done magic outside of school.
He lies about his name because there might be people from the ministry after him. In the movie, he just doesn't say his name. He simply never mentions it.
There's also Ocean Pike, who tells about Sirius's crime, right? He says that he killed a lot of people there, right? And that he had been arrested for it.
In the movie, he just says, oh, He's a murderer, right? And he was imprisoned in Azkaban, so he doesn't go into much detail. But in the book, he says that Sirius killed 13 people. He escaped from Azkaban, talks about the guards of Azkaban, doesn't mention Dementors, right? But he talks about the guards of Azkaban.
And the driver, Ernest, even says to change the subject there, because just thinking about the guards of Azkaban gave him goosebumps.
In the movie, Ernest just drives there without saying anything, right? The talking head, which the movie invented, is pretty cool.
Even when Harry arrives at the Leaky Cauldron, he's greeted by Fudge, both in the movie and in the book.
The difference is that in the movie, Fudge is in a room where Harry is taken, but in the book, Fudge is at the door of the Leaky Cauldron. He greets Harry right at the door of the bus.
And he says Harry's name there, right? And Pike gets surprised, doesn't he?
It's curious that the minister called that boy, who was technically named Neville, Harry. And then the minister says, "No, this is Harry Potter."
And then Pike says, "Oh, I thought I recognized that scar." Ocean Pike is kind of clueless, right? Harry stays at the Leaky Cauldron, doesn't he?
So, in the movie, the Monster Book of Monsters appears at this moment, right? That's when it happens. Look, as we've already seen here, we're practically at chapter 4 of the book, and the movie is showing it as if it's happening now, but that's actually in the first chapter of the book, right? So what now?
Harry gets the book there at the Leaky Cauldron, where the minister says he took the liberty of buying the supplies for him. While in the book, what really happens is that Harry spends 2 weeks staying at the Leaky Cauldron, and he hangs around there in Diagon Alley, right?
Of course, there's that whole thing with the minister saying, "Oh, we have a murderer on the loose. You have to promise me that you'll only stay in Diagon Alley."
And that, when night falls, you'll go back to your room. You won't stay out of your room. There at the Leaky Cauldron, at night. And then Harry promised. He stayed calm and all that.
And during those 2 weeks, he keeps walking around Diagon Alley. He keeps looking at the shops, looking at things. He sees the Firebolt for the first time at Quality Quidditch Supplies, while the Firebolt is only introduced in the movie.
At the end of the movie, look at what a huge difference that is, man. The Firebolt only appears at the end of the movie, and it's just Harry getting it in a mysterious way. While in the book, Harry sees the Firebolt at the shop, like, the Firebolt just arrived there. It's a new release, you know?
And he's even tempted like, wow, man, I'd spend a lot of money on it, but I already have the Nimbus 2000, so it's fine.
In the book, Harry also asks the Minister of Magic to sign his Hogsmeade visit form, right? But the minister obviously refuses. While he's there, at the Leaky Cauldron, staying there, he keeps doing his homework. And while he's doing that, he's sitting down at Florian Fortescue's, the ice cream shop. And Florian, who's the character there, the owner of the ice cream shop, he keeps giving Harry free sundaes, and he helps Harry with his studies because he knew a lot about the history of magic. So, Harry stays there, getting ice cream and studying. He also meets up with other friends like Dean, Neville, and Seamus. While he's there, he goes to the bookstore, and I also think the bookstore part makes a difference because he sees a book cover, Omens of Death, where he sees the figure of the Grim Reaper.
Preto, grande e tal.
And he already had in his mind the dog he saw there among the bushes, right? And then he starts to get worried. Like, Omens of Death. Then the owner of Flourish and Blots talks about the Grim.
Look, don't buy that book, because you'll start seeing Omens of Death everywhere. So this whole Grim thing, this Omen of Death, is much more emphasized in the book.
And then, in the bookstore, when Harry tells the seller, who was a Hogwarts student, he already starts putting on protective gloves to get the Monster Book of Monsters, which is kept in a cage, like a cage with several books that keep biting and attacking each other. Harry says he already has it, which relieves the seller. On the last day of vacation, when Harry is there in Diagon Alley, he meets Ron and Hermione, and then they go to the magical creatures shop. When he meets Ron, Ron is carrying a bag.
And he shows the new wand he had just bought at Ollivander's, because his wand broke the previous year.
And since the Weasleys had won a lottery prize, they had traveled to Egypt. They bought several things they needed there anyway. They spent almost all the money on the trip, but they also bought things they needed, like Ron's new wand. And then Ron shows it to Harry and all, really happy. And then they go together to the magical creatures shop, because it would be Hermione's birthday on September 19th. And she had some extra money that her parents gave her to buy something. And she said she wanted to buy an owl, some kind of pet. And Ron goes to the magical creatures shop to buy a tonic for Scabbers, because Scabbers is thin, apparently sick, losing fur, right? And that's important too, because Scabbers is like that, because obviously, right, he found out about Sirius Black's escape, since he's Wormtail disguised as a rat, so he's all tense and everything. And that shows in his appearance, right, anyway. And then Ron goes to buy this tonic for rats, and it's at the shop. Crookshanks jumps on Ron's head, and that's when Ron's dislike starts. Right there with Crookshanks, his annoyance with Crookshanks anyway, and Hermione buys Crookshanks, and Ron gets really mad about it. In the movie, you see Harry leaving the room and immediately running into Ron, and Hermione is there, already with Crookshanks, and she and Ron are already arguing because of him. While Hermione is also staying at the Leaky Cauldron during this last day of vacation, so they can go to King's Cross the next day, right? When the Hogwarts school year would start, so they're already staying there. And unlike what is shown in the movie, with Mr. Weasley calling Harry to talk about Sirius Black and all, in the book, Harry overhears Mr. Weasley talking to Molly. When they go upstairs, they have dinner and everything. Then they go up, each to their own room to sleep. And then, Harry hears an argument in Percy and Ron's room. And then Percy was angry because they took his head boy badge. It was Fred and George, right? And Ron thought Percy had taken the rat tonic he bought for Scabbers. But Ron had just forgotten. Harry says, "I'm going downstairs to check. I think you left it there." As he's about to go, what happens? He walks down the hallway and hears Arthur and Molly talking about Sirius, that he wanted to get Harry, and that the Ministry didn't want them to tell him.
Anyway, he overhears it by accident, but since he hears his name, he stops there and keeps listening.
Now, I think one of the big differences here is that in the movie, we see them.
At platform 9 3/4, Mrs. Weasley is running with Scabbers there, in a scene that I actually find kind of bizarre. She says, "For heaven's sake, don't miss it." That in the movie is to show, look, this element is important. And then it shows them already going to the train and talking, right? Harry talking about what happened, that he blew up his aunt. Anyway, but in the book, man, for them to go to King's Cross, the Ministry of Magic sends 2 cars. 2 cars for Mr. Weasley. Modified cars. Magical, obviously. Enchanted. And then they all get into the 2 cars and go to the Ministry. Obviously, these cars are for Harry's safety, right? Mr. Weasley says, "Oh, I work at the Ministry. They lent me the cars, and that's it." But it's really for Harry's safety.
Once they're on the platform, Arthur pulls Harry aside to tell him what he wanted to say about Sirius. But then Harry speaks to him.
"Look, Mr. Weasley, it's okay. I heard it by accident. You don't need to tell me. That way you keep your word to the minister and don't tell me. But I already know what it is. Don't worry." Then Arthur says, "You must be terrified." He says, "No, I'm really not. I'm not scared. It's all right. I'm going to Hogwarts. There's Dumbledore." And then Mr. Weasley asks him not to look for Sirius. And he says, "Why would I look for him? He wants to kill me." That didn't make sense to Harry. So, this line happens, just like in the movie, but in different places. When they're on the Hogwarts Express, there's a whole conversation there where Harry wants to talk about Sirius. Tell everything he had heard. And the sneakoscope that Ron gave him, it starts to whistle violently there. And then he grabs it from the trunk and says, "Hey, I kept it here at the bottom and all." Anyway, it starts to whistle. Why? Exactly because it would whistle when there was a threat. And it was Wormtail, right? Disguised as Scabbers. Another thing that's not shown either, while they're there, on the Express, it's Draco going to provoke Harry, but Draco obviously doesn't provoke him. He ends up giving up because Lupin is there, even though he's sleeping. There was a teacher there, a figure of authority, so he wasn't going to do anything in front of a teacher. When the train stops and there's that Dementor inspection, right? Harry is shaken there, affected. He faints. Anyway, in the book, there are still several details that were also left out of the movie. For example, when the train stops, when it breaks down there, the train loses power. Right, everything's dark. Neville comes in, asking what's going on, comes in, and steps on someone's foot. I think it was Hermione's. Ginny comes in too. And then they're all in the compartment. When the Dementor appears, right? Lupin wakes up before the Dementor actually arrives. He wakes up conjuring flames in his own hand to light up the place. And when the Dementor arrives, Lupin, he's awake there. He's got the flames in his hand. He's awake. And then Harry faints. That's when Harry is affected and faints. So there's that difference. As soon as Harry gets off the Hogwarts Express, right there, He gets off and is already in the carriage. Draco already starts making fun of him for fainting because of the Dementor. That's because Neville, Big Mouth, went around saying that Harry had fainted. And then, obviously, Harry gets pretty annoyed about it. But it's different in the movie, which, wow, happens when Harry is sitting there at the table, right? And then Draco calls out to him to provoke him, and Lupin is there at that moment, right? During Draco's mocking, and he steps in, he ends up interfering and easing things up. Both Harry and Hermione, when they arrive at Hogwarts, are called by Minerva to her office. And there, Madame Pomfrey comes to examine Harry, because Lupin had sent an owl while still on the express to let them know what had happened. And Madame Pomfrey wanted to see if Harry was okay and all, right? She even wanted him to spend the night there. But Harry says, "No, I'm fine. Professor Lupin gave me chocolate," to Madame Pomfrey. She's happy, because apparently they now had a defense against the dark arts teacher who knew what he was doing. As for Hermione, obviously, she goes to talk to Minerva there, right? After everything, Minerva tells Harry, "Oh, it's okay. You can leave us alone." And she goes to get the time turner. This happens the first moment she arrives there at Hogwarts. And then Hermione says, "Oh no, I just met with the professor to organize my class schedule for this year, and everything's fine." Another thing that happens, different from the movie, is that after Hagrid is appointed as the Professor of Care of Magical Creatures, the trio, when they get a chance, goes to him to congratulate him. And then Hagrid gets all happy. He says that if it weren't for them, they were essential for this to happen, since they proved Hagrid's innocence the previous year, right?
It's not shown in the movie either. I mean, it is shown, but in a different way. After they have the divination class in the movie, they're going down to go to the Care of Magical Creatures class.
And Ron asks how Hermione was taking ancient runes and divination at the same time, since the classes happened at the same time, and she tries to play it off and all that. That, in the book, happens when they're at the breakfast table. And Ron notices that she had overlapping times on her schedule, right? In the school timetable, she had classes at the same time. And then he tries to point it out to her. "Hermione, I think you wrote it down wrong since it's at the same time." She tells him to mind his own schedule and relax. That happens in the trio's first class, in the book, which is divination. Just like in the movie, Sir Cadogan already appears. Sir Cadogan, who is that crazy knight from the portraits, right? He already shows up, and he's the one who guides the trio to the divination classroom through the paintings, because they've never been to that part of the castle where the divination class is.
In fact, you have to go up through a little trapdoor there to get into the room.
But in the movie, Sir Cadogan only appears in the background in the paintings, and the scene where he was actually going to appear, you know, the one that would show Sir Cadogan, was deleted, which is him taking the place of the fat lady there, guarding the entrance to the Gryffindor common room. In the first divination class, Hermione already questions the teacher. When the teacher says that Harry has the Grim there, kind of like it is in the movie, then in the book, Hermione comes in saying, "Well, to me, that doesn't look like a Grim." You know, like, Hermione is already pretty skeptical. She already comes in very skeptical about divination. Professor McGonagall's first class in the book is about animagi. She even transforms right there in class. But everyone is kind of in shock from Trelawney's class, talking about omens of death, things like that. And she makes a few jabs at Trelawney, like, she wants to say more, but she holds back out of respect for her colleague and professionalism. But she makes a few jabs at Trelawney. Then there's also a moment when Hermione lets it slip that she attended classes at the same time, which is when she's upset with divination. And she says that arithmancy was much more interesting. And then, in the movie, there's something like that, right? With Hermione talking.
For me, ancient runes is fascinating. And then Ron says, ancient runes and divination are at the same time. But here, she says she attended both arithmancy and divination.
Hagrid's first class in the movie is also about hippogriffs, right? Where he introduces Buckbeak and everything. But he only introduces Buckbeak, while in the book there are several hippogriffs, and Buckbeak is just one of them. And unlike in the book, in the movie it seems like Harry is kind of forced to go, right? Because everyone else steps back. It's like he's volunteering by accident. He doesn't really understand. He doesn't want to touch it. He's kind of hesitant.
In the book, he wanted Hagrid's class to be a success, right? So he volunteers. "Oh, I want to touch it. I want to bow. I want to pet it."
The hippogriff. Well, not the hippogriff. And then it ends up being the hippogriff. And then, in the movie, it shows Draco having a little jealous fit, right? And going to provoke the hippogriff. But it's different in the book. Afterwards, They split up there, in trios, in pairs, anyway. And each one goes to a hippogriff. Harry is on another hippogriff now, and then he's near Draco, and he hears Draco talking. Draco bows to the hippogriff, and the hippogriff even returns the bow. And Draco says that, oh, it wasn't that hard, that it was just a stupid animal and whatever. Then the hippogriff gets angry and attacks Draco, which is very different from the movie. After all that happened, the trio still goes to Hagrid's hut, which doesn't show up in the movie, right? They go to Hagrid's hut, and Hagrid is drunk, man. He's drunk, feeling bad about everything that happened on the first day and all, and worried about what was going to happen. And then he gets angry when he realizes that Harry was outside the castle, in those conditions, you know, with a murderer wanting to kill him. And then Hagrid gets angry and takes them back to the castle.
One thing is that in the movie, Draco keeps pretending, that his arm is hurt, making a big deal out of it. But in the book, this happens in a much more intense way.
He keeps doing this for about 3 months. And in potions class, Snape tells Ron and Harry to cut Draco's potion ingredients for him during class. And Draco keeps provoking them. Man, he's unbearable, insufferable. Seriously, it's infuriating. Draco even teases Harry, saying that if it had happened to him, right, what happened there? About Sirius Black, he would go after him. He would seek revenge, because Draco knows, right, that Sirius, in this case, betrayed Harry's parents. Anyway, that was the story known in the wizarding world. And then Harry has no idea what Draco is talking about, or what he's trying to say.
The first defense against the dark arts class, in the movie, is about the boggart and all that. It really is like that, but it's outside the classroom. They are taken by Lupin to the staff room. When they get there, Snape is there. And he's really unbearable there, saying that there was no need to close the door, that he would rather not be in that place while Lupin was teaching the class. And he warns that the class had Neville Longbottom, who was useless.
Anyway, and then Lupin says, "Look, what a coincidence, Snape. Neville is exactly the person I'm going to call to help me, because I think he's extremely capable, right?" Encouraging him, giving Neville a boost. And Neville gets all embarrassed, because that had never happened before. Lupin was super kind, right?
Anyway, there's also a part where they're going to the staff room and Lupin runs into Peeves, right?
They all find Peeves there, putting gum in the keyhole of the door. And then Lupin tells Peeves not to do that because it would bother Filch.
And Peeves starts singing a song teasing Lupin, and the song went, "Crazy, Wolf, Lupin."
So that was already giving hints about what would come in the future, right? But in the movie, obviously, this is cut.
And then Lupin casts a spell with a really funny name, Wedgewuzz.
And the gum shoots out like a projectile, straight into Peeves's nose, and gets stuck in his nostril. There, unlike in the movie, Harry doesn't face the boggart in the film, right? Harry faces it, it turns into a Dementor. Lupin steps in front, but in the book, that doesn't happen. Harry earns points there in class, because he answers what it was, right? Hermione says it was a boggart, and Harry answers too.
Because they were so scary, or because they were weaker in a group, right? And then he ends up earning points for that. But Lupin kind of doesn't let him face the boggart, and that makes Harry really worried. Another thing that's also quite different is the forms the boggart takes, right?
In the movie, we have a snake, we have a spider. The only one that's really the same there is Snape's, which is Neville's, right? Snape wearing his grandmother's clothes. But the rest are very different. That clown is completely a creation of the movie. That giant snake too, that appears. It's an ominous spirit. For Simus, for Dean, it's a severed hand. For Parvati.
If I'm not mistaken, it was a mummy. They were much scarier things like that. In the movie later, right? It barely shows any classes. It only shows Harry having the Patronus lesson there, because he wanted to improve.
But there are several other classes happening. And Hagrid's classes get really boring because he wants to go easy on them. And then they teach the students about flobberworms, and they have to keep feeding flobberworms with lettuce, so it's really boring for them. One thing I think is missing in the movie is how much Crookshanks is involved in the story and how much he tries to catch Scabbers at several moments. That was already a clue to the story.
For example, Crookshanks hears Ron saying that Scabbers was in his backpack, and he just goes there and attacks the backpack to get Scabbers.
And then Ron gets furious and says, This cat is bloodthirsty. He heard me say that Scabbers was in the backpack and came here because before he didn't even come close. And Hermione is like, no, Ron, don't be ridiculous. He just sniffed it out and stuff. But he really was very smart because he was half Kneasel, right? Crookshanks. And then he hears Ron talking and goes to the backpack. Man, these little things, I kind of miss them, I admit. Because Crookshanks, he's really something. He points the story in a certain direction, right? He's there pointing the way, like, hey, there's something here, you know? In Trelawney's first class, she makes a prediction in the book, right there. She makes several predictions, right? And she says that what Lavender was afraid would happen was going to happen on October 16th.
And then, on October 16th, Lavender gets the news that her bunny had been killed. And Hermione uses logic for that, right? To refute that, she says, look, Lavender, were you expecting your pet to die? Then she says, no, yes, but why? Was he old? No, he was a baby, so were you expecting him to die?
And then she says, well, you got the letter today, right? That doesn't mean he died today. The letter arrived today, so he didn't die on the 16th of Sakisasai. And then Ron interrupts and says, oh, don't mind her, Lavender. Hermione doesn't care about other people's pets. And then Hermione gets really mad.
With that, the weekend to go to Hogsmeade arrives, right? Harry doesn't go, of course. And then Dean even offers to forge Uncle Vernon's signature so he could go. And then Harry ends up having that conversation with Lupin, right? In the movie, it's a work of art. It's beautiful. The soundtrack is wonderful. On the bridge, that beautiful scenery. But that doesn't happen in the book, guys. It's totally different. The book's conversation isn't deep and doesn't mention Harry's parents or the past at all. Lupin calls him to talk and explains why he didn't let him face the boggart, because he thought it would take the form of Voldemort, and he didn't want everyone to get scared. Then it shows the Grindylow, which was in the aquarium there, and had just arrived recently.
And Snape comes in carrying a goblet of potion for Lupin. And then Lupin explains, you know, oh, this here. Snape is making a potion for me. It's a very difficult potion. I'm not very good at making it myself, and he's being kind enough to help me, because I've been feeling a bit sick, and only this potion helps me. Anyway, that's already a hint of what's developing, of what's happening in the story.
This Hogsmeade trip happens on October 31st, which is the day of the Halloween party, right? So when they go to the party and everything, the Halloween party, after the Hogsmeade trip, and then Ron and Hermione are telling Harry what it's like. They give him some sweets, and so on.
And then the attack on the portrait of the fat lady happens, right? That also happens when they're coming back from Hogsmeade. Not Harry, though. The rest of the school. It happens like that, too.
In the movie, when they're coming back, the Halloween party doesn't happen. It's canceled. But in the movie, the fat lady herself says, right, oh, it was Sirius Black who attacked me. In the book, it's Peeves. Peeves is there, floating, doing somersaults, cartwheels in the air, because he's really happy with all the chaos happening.
And Dumbledore asks him, wow, did you see who did this? Peeves even answers,
the fat lady is in a portrait on the first floor. Well, the second floor. She's dying of embarrassment and doesn't want to reveal herself, while he's very cynical. You know, the headmaster asks, oh, did she say who did this? And then Peeves says, oh yes, she did. That Sirius Black is a real genius. And then, like, everyone is shocked.
Man, Sirius Black in the movie is more or less like he is in the book. It's just missing Peeves, right?
Sir Cadogan is put there as the only one who agrees to stay in the portrait, guarding the entrance to the Gryffindor common room. Because he was completely crazy, he was the only one who had the courage to accept that. No other portrait wanted to stay there. Harry, after all that, he ends up being completely watched, right? There's that really crazy scene in the movie with the castle closing, right? The gate closing and all, the wolf howling and everything. That was Lupin.
You can even see that there's a full moon there and all. That's a really cool detail in the movie. It's something that's not mentioned at all. It's just visual and auditory, right?
And they really stay in the sleeping bags there. And then the whole school is there. All the houses are in the Great Hall, right? No, it's just Gryffindor, isn't it?
And poor Harry can't even fart after that, because everyone is watching him. All the teachers are after him. That's not shown, right? In the movies, they don't show security watching over Harry.
The game that happens there, in the movie, against Hufflepuff would actually be against Slytherin.
But they use Draco's arm injury as an excuse not to play, and then they end up switching and playing against Hufflepuff.
But in the movie, it's very, very different. Okay, there's the storm. Really, like in the book, it's hard to see the game. It's violent. It's intense. But in the movie, Harry sees the Grim in the clouds. while in the book, the Grim, the dog, is actually in the stands. It's not something in the clouds or anything like that. He's in the stands watching when lightning strikes and he vanishes, making Harry panic. Harry exclaims, "I'm really seeing this creature. I'm going to die."
He really thought it was a sign of death, that it was the Grim.
And in the game too, the Seeker in the movie gets struck by lightning and falls off the broom. It's kind of a crazy thing.
And this guy was supposed to be Cedric, because he's the Seeker, right? And then, in the book, Cedric catches the snitch because he doesn't see that Harry fell off his broom, that he was attacked by the Dementors. So, he even wants to revoke that, wants to postpone the match, have a rematch. But the victory was really Hufflepuff's, and it was fair. Everyone thought it was fair. No one blamed Harry. That's why Snape actually did substitute for Lupin in a class. There, Snape says that Lupin wasn't feeling well enough to teach, and then, in that class, unlike in the movie, he asks the difference between a werewolf and an animagus, while in the book, he asks the difference between a werewolf and a regular wolf. They had to introduce animagus in the movie, so it would make sense later, and everyone knew it was an animagus. In the book, this happens in Minerva's class, but since that scene was cut, they had to find another way. Also, I forgot to mention something else from the Quidditch match. Hermione waterproofs Harry's glasses so he can play in the rain. No problem. There, with a spell, Dumbledore conjures, well, it doesn't show it, right? Dumbledore conjures the Patronus and drives away the Dementors. Harry doesn't see it because he's fainted and unconscious, but that's what happens. Potions. That class isn't even shown in the movies. Ron loses his temper with Draco and throws a crocodile heart at him, because Draco kept provoking Harry there about the fainting with the Dementors, and especially after the game, right? And then Ron loses his temper and gets a detention. Man, he literally has to clean bedpans in the infirmary without using magic. Snape was really cruel.
In a conversation with Harry, Lupin tells him that the Whomping Willow was planted at the school.
He also started studying. That was already a detail that would become important later on, and in the movie, it's not even mentioned. There's also something in the movie that's quite different. On another Hogsmeade trip, Harry tries sneaking in with the invisibility cloak. Fred and George notice and say, "We have a better way," giving him the Marauder's map. That's not what happens. The twins approach Harry, say they have an early Christmas present, and give him the Marauder's map, and that's how he goes to Hogsmeade. They show him the map there, and then Harry goes to the One-Eyed Witch passage. All of that is shown in the book, but not in the movie. In the movie, he just comes out of the trapdoor, and that's it. The movie makes it seem really fast. Harry goes into the passage and is suddenly in Hogsmeade. But in reality, he spends almost an hour walking through the secret passage before reaching Hogsmeade. He surprises Ron and Hermione, who were picking out sweets to bring to him, right? But without the invisibility cloak, it's not the same as in the movie. No, not in the movie. They combined a different moment in the movie to show Harry arriving in Hogsmeade and all that. But this moment where they're at the Shrieking Shack in the book happens later. It's during another visit where it's just Harry and Ron. They go to the Three Broomsticks, right? On this visit to Hogsmeade. And Harry sits at a table and all that. And he's not wearing the invisibility cloak or anything. There's no such thing as, oh, underage wizards can't go in. That was just something from the movie, just so Ron and Hermione would stay outside and make it more, I don't know, more private, right? The three of them go in the book, and they don't go in because they hear Harry's name or anything. They go in because they wanted to have a butterbeer to take Harry there, and then they're sitting there, and in walks the Minister of Magic, Minerva, Hagrid, Flitwick, and they all sit very close to them, and Hermione casts a spell and brings a vase with a tree closer to their table, making them stay hidden. And that's when Harry hears the whole conversation about Sirius, about the Secret Keeper, finds out that Sirius was friends with his parents, and that he was his godfather. That's what happens. In the movie, it's kind of similar. He gets the information at that moment, but the circumstances are different. When Harry comes back, it's described that he didn't even know how to get back. You know, to Hogwarts, he was kind of disoriented. He says goodbye to Ron and Hermione, goes over to the passage to return to Hogwarts. He's completely disoriented, doesn't want to talk about it or anything, and he goes to his room and grabs it. The first thing he does is grab the photo album that Hagrid gave him, which he put together with photos of all kinds of people. It had, you know, pictures of the Potters at different moments, and then he has a picture of his parents' wedding there. And there's Sirius in the background, and he had never noticed Sirius until that moment. And he also says that he looks really different, right? The book's description says he was very different from the man in the newspaper photo. I mean, after 12 years in Azkaban, he was just a shadow of himself. Another thing that isn't shown in the movie is that Harry, Ron, and Hermione help Hagrid with Buckbeak's defense. They try to study. Ron and Harry forget, and Hermione ends up doing it pretty much by herself. But they do try to help Hagrid with Buckbeak's defense.
Because there are hearings going on to judge his case. Oh, and one more thing.
You might be wondering how Hagrid and Buckbeak got to London, right? Since they had to go to the hearing. At the Ministry of Magic, Hagrid wasn't riding Buckbeak. Not because Buckbeak couldn't handle it, right? No creature can handle Hagrid's weight. But they actually took the night bus. Can you believe it? There's this detail in the book, and maybe if you haven't read it or it's been a while, you don't remember. But Hagrid says, "Oh, I booked 2 beds on the night bus for us to go to London."
Anyway, on Christmas morning, Harry gets nothing less than the Firebolt. He receives the Firebolt as a gift.
Because his broom had broken, right? He receives the broom anonymously, you know, without any note or anything. But in the movie, man, it's very different. Harry only gets the broom at the end. There's no suspense. Nothing. The whole Firebolt plot in the book is actually the trigger for a huge fight between Harry, Ron, and Hermione. So, Hermione, when she sees that Harry gets the Firebolt and there's no note or anything, she runs to call Minerva. And Minerva confiscates Harry's broom because she suspects, just like Hermione, that the broom was sent by Sirius Black, which it actually was, right?
So, they take the broom apart to check if everything was okay with it. And Ron gets really mad at Hermione. Man, he's really mad at Hermione. Harry also gets upset with her.
Yeah, the broom he really wanted, but they worried it would get ruined since they planned to take it apart. Anyway, so Ron and Harry kind of stop talking to Hermione because of that, man. And it's a pretty tense period. And then Hagrid even scolds them later, saying this, "Man, I thought you guys cared way more about your friendship than about brooms or rats." You know, because Ron also wasn't talking to Hermione? Crookshanks' attacks, the attempts Crookshanks made to attack Scabbers, right?
At Christmas, they have lunch together with the teachers, with the headmaster, right? The students who stay at Hogwarts during the holidays, they have this lunch in the Great Hall. That's something that gets cut.
And man, I really wanted to see that in the series. Seriously, I really wanted to see that in the series. In fact, it's from this moment that a theory comes up where Trelawney says she wouldn't sit down. Because when 13 sit together, the first one to get up would be the first to die. And then there were already 13 of them. And when she arrives, right? Because Scabbers would be with Ron and he was a person, not a rat, right? And then Dumbledore is the first to get up. And so there's this theory that Dumbledore was the first to get up. And he was actually the first one who died there at the table, right? After those events in Half-Blood Prince. Anyway, it's just a theory.
Oliver Wood comes back from vacation and then he goes to talk to Harry about Quidditch practice and all that. And Ron says that he had won, right? Harry had gotten a Firebolt and told what happened. And Wood also goes crazy.
And he says, "No, I'm going to talk to Minerva. I'm going to make her see reason. A Firebolt. No, what's that?" And then he goes to talk to Minerva, and Minerva yells at him,
telling Wood that the Firebolt, Quidditch, wasn't more important than Harry's life. He kind of doesn't get that, you know, Wood. I love Wood, man. With the Quidditch thing, he's completely obsessed with Quidditch, like Harry could die. But for him, Quidditch is all that matters. We have to win at Quidditch. Lupin starts giving Harry lessons about the Patronus, right? And it's kind of like it is in the movie, but in the movie, we only see one lesson happening. And in the book, it happens several times. The memory that Harry uses to cast the Patronus, the one that actually lets him cast the Patronus, is different from the one in the movie. In the movie, he says he was thinking about his parents, that he saw their faces, and they talked to him. He didn't even know if it was a real memory, but it was strong enough. And then, he casts the Patronus with that. But in the book, the memory he chooses is when he finds out he's a wizard, when Hagrid says, "Look, you're a wizard," when he realizes he's about to leave the Dursleys and go to Hogwarts. That's the memory he chooses.
Ron finds his sheet full of blood, torn up there, with Crookshanks' fur, and then Scabbers is missing. And then he gets really angry and fights with Hermione, saying that Crookshanks finally managed to kill Scabbers.
In the movie, this thing with the sheet and the blood isn't shown. It's only shown Ron saying that Crookshanks had killed him, right? That he had been torn apart. And Hermione says no. And Harry goes to talk to Hermione and tells her, "Look, really, you know, the cat was always after him. There was fur there in the dormitory. Blood." And Hermione gets really mad and argues with Harry too. and she tells him that she knew he would take Ron's side, so he should just go and stay with him. And that's it, you know? And then they stop talking to each other.
Minerva gives the Firebolt back to Harry. He goes to practice, and during practice, Ron asks if he can take a few laps on the Firebolt.
And you know, that's something I like and I miss. I missed it in the movies. It's not something crucial, but it shows their friendship, you know? It shows how they also fight, how they also have disagreements, especially with all that stuff about scabbers and everything. But it also shows their friendship. Man, Harry, of course, is like, want to take it for a spin? Go ahead, man. You can ride the broom. You can fly it. That's really cool. In the Quidditch match between Gryffindor and Ravenclaw, Cho Chang appears earlier in the books, but in the movies, she's only introduced in Goblet of Fire. That Quidditch match isn't in the movie, so there's nothing to mention. She's not in it, right? And there, in the book, Harry already feels something for Cho Chang. He's already like, wow, she's cute and all. And Wood even yells at him, right? When Cho Chang was blocking his way in the air, trying to stop him from catching the snitch, Wood goes, hey, this isn't the time for chivalry. If you have to, knock her off her broom. Dude, during this Quidditch match, something really cool happens. Harry casts his Patronus during the game because he sees the Dementors and all, but in the end, they weren't actually Dementors. It was Draco, Flint, Crabbe, and Goyle who climbed on each other's shoulders and dressed up as Dementors to try to sabotage the game and mess with Harry. But then they get a serious detention with Minerva, and Harry casts the Patronus. He casts it without even looking back, you know, and goes after the snitch. This next detail is in the movie, in a deleted scene. Unfortunately, it's in a deleted scene, but it really could have been in the final version of the movie. Sirius Black actually breaking into the Gryffindor common room. Ron wakes up screaming, and he's the one who says, look, Sirius Black was here with a knife and everything. And people are like, no, Ron, are you dreaming? And so on. And he says, no, he really was here. You can ask Sir Cadogan, right? And Sir Cadogan says, no, I certainly let him in. He had all the week's passwords written down on a piece of paper, and it was the password that Neville had lost, right? That he had written down, because Sir Cadogan kept changing the password several times a day. Look how a little detail, right? Something silly builds up a whole event that comes later, like Sir Cadogan changing the password, Neville writing down the passwords, and then losing them. Then Sirius Black got it. He didn't lose it. Crookshanks stole the passwords and gave them to Sirius Black so he could get in and try to catch Wormtail, right? Now, one thing that's not shown is this thing that I keep thinking about. Every time I read Prisoner of Azkaban, or reread it or revisit it, I think about this and get curious. Man, they put trolls to guard the entrance to the Gryffindor common room. Not troll portraits, literally trolls, like actual trolls to guard it, you know? Trolls. Yeah, there were trolls guarding the entrance. Ron was all, you know? The movie doesn't show it either, but anyway, Ron gets all worked up after Sirius attacks. He was kind of the center of attention, right? And every time he told the story, he would exaggerate a little part of it and stuff. Wow, the knife was this big. And Neville, poor guy, got punished for losing the passwords, right? He got detention, was forbidden from going to Hogsmeade, and banned from knowing the new passwords. He could only enter when someone else was leaving or entering, joining them. Poor guy. Harry goes to Hogsmeade, sneaking out once again, even though he was there, fighting with Hermione, even with Hermione saying, look, there was that attack and all. I don't think it's a good idea for you to go. He still goes. And then, before he goes, he's using the invisibility cloak. Snape almost catches him, but he manages to go just fine.
He goes, and then, when he's there, he's at the Shrieking Shack with Ron.
And then Draco comes to mock him, but Harry stays under the invisibility cloak the whole time. And then that thing happens where Draco comes to mock him. In the movie, Harry throws snowballs, but in the book, it's mud, right? And then, at one point, Crabbe trips over Harry's cloak and pulls it. And then Harry's head becomes visible. Draco sees that and runs away. Harry runs back to the castle as fast as he can. He gets there, but Snape catches him and says, oh, then come to my office. Come on. Then he starts asking Harry where he was. He says he heard a funny story, that Draco told him that he saw Harry's head in Hogsmeade, right? And then he asks him to empty his pockets, and then he finds Harry's pockets full of Zonko's stuff, and also with the Marauder's map. And then he tries to use the Marauder's map, right? He asks the Marauder's map to reveal its secrets, and he gets insulted, which, in the movie, happens in a very, very different way. Harry is looking at the Marauder's map in the middle of the night, sees Pettigrew's name, and simply goes out to look for him, starts walking to find him, and Snape ends up running into him. But Harry doesn't even see Peter Pettigrew's name on the Marauder's map. In the book, it's Lupin who sees his name when he's there at the Shrieking Shack, right? When they're at the Shrieking Shack and Lupin sees his name there. Anyway, so, man, in the book, it happens like this. Ron comes running to save Harry, right? To say no. I was the one who gave this to Harry and all that. But there's a very important point. In the movie, it seems like Snape has no idea who Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs are. But when he sees the names in the book, he uses the fireplace with flue powder. He uses the fireplace in his office to call Lupin, and Lupin arrives through the fireplace. And then he says, "Look, do you know what this is?"
Harry, I think he got it straight from the makers, because he recognizes who the Marauders are. He understood that they made his life hell at school.
And then Lupin takes Harry to his office, along with Ron, and confiscates the map.
Actually, at this moment right in the movie, it's even milder because Snape says something like this to Harry.
"Ah, it's impressive how much you look like your father, walking all proud and everything." And Harry says, "No, my father wasn't like that, and neither am I. Now, you can lower your wand." But in the book, Snape is actually insulting James there, saying he was arrogant, saying a bunch of things. And Harry yells at Snape, tells him to shut up, like, really tells him to shut up, yelling, you know? And then Snape questions why he was talking like that. And Harry says, "Stop talking."
Do meu pai, tá ligado? Para de... Meu pai não era assim, mano.
Talking about him. I really want to see a more reactive Harry and Snape in the series. I'm really hoping for that. Buckbeak is sentenced to death and all, and then Hermione and Ron end up making up in this context. And then they don't give up on the defense. And Ron had forgotten, but then he says, "No, I'm going to help you now, Hermione and all." And then they start trying to appeal to save Buckbeak. In the movie, there are also several moments, right, where Ron asks, "Where's Hermione? Where did she come from? Where did she come from?" But in the book, it's the opposite. Hermione doesn't just appear, she actually disappears. Then, they arrive at Charms class, and this occurs. She was almost at the door with them, but then she disappeared. Later, she misses Charms class and doesn't show up. Upon arriving at the common room, they find her asleep from exhaustion. She forgot to go back in time for Charms class, so that's why she kind of disappeared there, you know, when she was with them in the movie. They used the opposite to justify her showing up out of nowhere. So, something that happens before the final Quidditch match, which isn't shown in the movie, and the final itself isn't shown either, right? The Quidditch final.
It's Harry seeing Crookshanks together with the dog, together with the black dog on the Hogwarts grounds. He thinks, man, am I crazy? Am I losing my mind?
And then he asks Ron to look out the window, but they had already disappeared by the time of the Quidditch final. Draco, man, he's really sneaky, isn't he? He grabs Harry's broom, since he can't beat Harry at Quidditch.
He couldn't even do it with the Nimbus 2001, which is better than the Nimbus 2000. And with the Firebolt, there was no way he could.
He throws himself onto Harry's broom and hangs on, holding on to slow Harry down, man. And since, unfortunately, this great moment was cut, Gryffindor is the champion of the House Cup. Oliver Wood finally wins a title because that was his last year, and so it's a moment of a lot of partying, a lot of celebration. Then come the exams, right? The final tests at Hogwarts, which also aren't shown in the movie. And there's something really cool in Lupin's test that he does, like an obstacle course. Just so you understand what a progression course is, for those who maybe don't know. You know those movies we see, with training, like police or military, where there are those obstacles you go through, climb, jump. That's called an obstacle course, right? And then he sets up an obstacle course with all the things he taught throughout the year. So, the students face a Kappa, a Hinky Punk, a Boggart. Man, that's really cool. I really wish I had seen that. Actually, it's in this test that we find out what Hermione's Boggart looks like. Because in the first class, she hadn't faced it yet.
It's Minerva saying that she failed there. She flunked the subjects and she can't face the Boggart. She even gets a bit nervous because of that.
We're already approaching the end of both the movie and the book. And at some points, there are quite a few differences. Some other things are very similar. But there's one thing. Harry leaves the invisibility cloak there in the secret passage to Hogsmeade when he's coming back after that. You know, after Snape catches him there, so he leaves the cloak there, hidden, and then the one who goes to get the cloak is Hermione. When they go there too,
on Buckbeak's execution day, they get the invisibility cloak at Hagrid's hut.
That day, they find out, right, that Scabbers is actually alive, It's not Hagrid who finds Scabbers like the movie shows, right? The movie shows that, take better care of your pets, Ron, and hands Scabbers to Hermione, who's going to make some tea. Because Hagrid is very nervous, and she's going to get the kettle, and inside the kettle, Scabbers is hiding. And then, Ron grabs him. He's desperate, squeaking there, wanting to get out. He didn't want to stay there at all. And then, they leave Hagrid's hut and go out to get away from there. And then Scabbers bites, falls to the ground, and Ron runs after him to get him back. That really happens. It's pretty similar in the movie and the book, but then Crookshanks shows up at that moment. The big difference is that in the movie, Crookshanks doesn't appear there. In the book, he does. Crookshanks shows up and tries to catch Scabbers, and then Ron gets mad, right? Yelling at him, telling him to get out of there. And then the Grim shows up. And then the big difference is that in the movie, it jumps and goes straight for Ron and pulls him inside, right? In the book, it jumps at Harry. It pushes Harry like this and knocks Harry down.
It jumps with all 4 paws on Harry, knocks him down, and then goes to pull Ron inside.
In the book, it's Crookshanks who paralyzes the Whomping Willow. He presses the knot on the tree and paralyzes it so they can go in.
There's not that grotesque scene. Sorry. I love Prisoner of Azkaban. It's my favorite movie too, but that Whomping Willow scene is ridiculous.
Hermione grabbing Harry, pulling him. That scene is really bad, really awful. Anyway.
Then Crookshanks is the one who stops it there, so they can get inside the Shrieking Shack once it's revealed that the dog was serious and all that.
They're there having, that whole calm conversation, nothing tense. And then Sirius says, only one person is going to die today. And then Ron, with his broken leg, puts himself in front of Harry and says, if you want to kill Harry, you'll have to kill me too. But in the movie, right, it's Hermione who says that. They changed that part when Harry gets tangled up with Sirius in that physical fight that happens in the movie. In the book, Ron and Hermione also take part. Hermione kicks Sirius hard, she really kicks him, and Ron throws himself on top of him. It's a crazy brawl between the 3 of them, And Sirius grabs Harry by the throat.
And Crookshanks even comes over and sits on top of Sirius, trying to protect him. Crookshanks is the only sensible one in this whole situation.
Guys, you don't get it. Hold on, let me explain this.
And Harry just kicks the cat, saying, oh no, not you too. Because, well, it kind of confirms it for him, right? The dog is Sirius Black. I saw the cat with the dog. They're in cahoots. They're together. So he kicks the cat, poor thing.
Then, here it happens pretty much like in the movie. Lupin arrives, right? Then the reveal happens, right? Wait a minute. He's a werewolf, Hermione says. Right, he's a werewolf, and so on. And then Lupin explains, look, I saw a name on the map of someone I thought was dead. What happens in the book is that it's much more detailed, the conversation is much longer, and they tell the story of how the Whomping Willow was planted here because of me. I said it was planted the year I started, but actually, it was because of me, right? All of this exists because of me. Your father was an animagus. All of this is explained. Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, Prongs. It's all explained. And then, only after that, they reveal Wormtail there, right? The way they take him out of his animagus form. And then Harry still kind of doesn't believe it. And he only believes it after a lot of conversation there with Sirius Black. He tells how he escaped from Azkaban. None of this is in the movie. And then, after that, Harry finally believes when he says, Harry, believe me, I would never betray your father. I would never betray your, Lily, James. And then Harry sees the truth in what he's saying and finally believes him. Oh, there's something else that happens too. When Ron gets up with his broken leg, Lupin says to him, Ron, your leg is hurt. And Ron yells at him, stay away from me, werewolf, showing some of the prejudice people and wizards had against werewolves. But in that situation, it's understandable, right? Because they thought they were all together there, that they were, well, dark wizards. When they're talking there, right? Lupin is explaining everything and revealing what happened. Harry asks, so is it because of that prank you pulled that Snape doesn't like my dad? And then Snape comes out from under the cloak, because the invisibility cloak had fallen near the Whomping Willow when they're attacked. And then Snape says, yeah, that's exactly why. And then, in this moment with Snape, a lot of things happen that don't happen in the movie. In the movie, Snape is just there, oh, he's going to turn them in, threatens them and all that. But Snape yells at Hermione, calls her stupid because she asks to listen. Thinking there might be a misunderstanding that maybe Sirius could really be innocent. Harry also wants to listen, and Snape yells at him too, saying they don't know what they're talking about. Anyway, and then, when they're about to attack, in the movie, it shows Harry attacking Snape, right? But it's actually all three of them, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, who attack Snape at the same time. And then he gets knocked out. Then, anyway, Sirius explains how he identified Scabbers, how he escaped from Azkaban. All of that is explained. He recognized him from the newspaper photo that he saw, which Fudge had left there on the day of the Azkaban visit. Man, there are a lot of details that aren't in this moment. So they tie themselves up, right? They decide, okay, let's go. Let's take Pettigrew to the castle. And then Ron ties himself to him, and Lupin ties himself to him. But when he handcuffs himself to him, right? He conjures handcuffs and everything. And they take Snape there, unconscious, floating. But when they get outside, it's a full moon and everything. Lupin transforms, Pettigrew takes advantage, grabs the wand and casts a spell on Ron, and Ron passes out. So, there's a big mess at that moment. And then Pettigrew transforms and escapes, pretty much like it is in the movie, except for the fact that Ron is attacked, and the fact that they were tied together. Then everything else happens pretty much the same, except for that scene where Snape tries to protect them in the movie, right? And then they go to the lake, near the lake, and when they're there, Harry, Sirius, and Hermione, all three of them faint, all three are attacked. Harry tries to cast the Patronus, Hermione tries to cast the Patronus but can't. And that's it, right? In the movie, this isn't shown. In fact, a Dementor grabs Harry by the neck and even takes off its hood to give him the Dementor's kiss. After the attack by the Dementors, Harry faints. He sees the Patronus there. He sees someone on the other side, who he thinks is his father. That's right, this happens in the movie too. But what isn't shown is that Snape regains consciousness, and he's the one who takes everyone to the castle, both Hermione and Harry, who are unconscious, Sirius too, who is unconscious, and Ron, who was knocked out, and Lupin, who was deep in the forest, transformed. And Wormtail had escaped, right? And then, when we're in the hospital wing, and Harry is just waking up, right? Like, wow, what happened? Oh, Sirius, they're going to kill him. That's Hermione talking to Harry, right? But then, there's this whole part where Harry is waking up, pretending he was asleep to hear what was going on there.
And he hears Snape talking to Fudge, and Fudge saying that, oh, everything Snape had done was worthy of reward.
An Order of Merlin, that if he could interfere, he would make it an Order of Merlin, first class. And Snape still tries to get Harry punished, right? Because even though he's saying, oh, they were saying that Sirius was innocent and all that.
And Potter is always disrespecting the rules. I think he deserves a proper punishment.
I don't know what, because Dumbledore always lets him off the hook, things like that. And Fudge is like, come on, be reasonable, right? Look at everything that just happened. But Snape still wanted Harry to be punished. When the minister comes in, Harry tries to talk to him. Look, you got the wrong guy and all that. Sirius is innocent. Then the minister says, oh, are you still confused? And Harry yells at him. Harry shouts at the minister, look, I'm not confused. You got the wrong person. Sirius is innocent and all that.
And Fudge, thinking he was still confused because of the spell, which Sirius never cast on him, but Snape said he did. Then Dumbledore arrives and asks everyone to leave.
He says he wants to speak privately with Harry and Hermione since Ron was unconscious.
And then he says that he heard Sirius's story and that it was hard to believe their story, given all the circumstances, right? And then he gives Hermione the hint about the time turner, right? He gives her the hint about time and all, and says that if everything went well, more than one innocent life would be saved, talking about Buckbeak. And then Hermione uses the time turner. They go back in time, and things happen more or less like in the movie, this part, right?
But Dumbledore says, look, I'm going to close the infirmary. I'm going to close the hospital wing. So you have to come back before the room is locked.
Unlike in the movie, in the book, they change places. They're not there in the infirmary. When they go back in time, they show up in another place. Then they go there. They do everything they have to do. They get to Buckbeak, free Buckbeak, everything more or less like it is in the book. And then there's a moment when when they're hiding there after freeing Buckbeak, that Harry wants to grab it. The invisibility cloak was left so Snape wouldn't take it. But Hermione warns, you can't do that. If you're seen, it'll cause trouble.
And then, well, just as he was about to disobey Hermione and do it, Hagrid walks by, celebrating that Buckbeak had escaped, right?
After everything happens, when they leave the Whomping Willow, Lupin goes after them in the movie because Hermione howls and all, but that doesn't happen in the book.
And they hide in Hagrid's hut, because Harry says Lupin is coming here, so we need to leave. And then they hide there in the hut. That's where they watch everything happening, and it's from the hut that Harry leaves.
Because he says, I need to see, I'm not going to do anything, but I need to see, you know? Because I need to be there, because the person, my father, is going to appear there.
And that's when he casts the Patronus, realizing he had already done it. He says, "No one's coming, my dad's not coming, I have to do it. Wait, I've already done it." And then he goes there and does it, pretty much like it is in the movie. The only difference is that he's in Hagrid's hut, and he leaves the hut and does it, and casts the Patronus.
In the movie, he was already hiding in the forest, right? Also, Hermione wasn't with Harry when he cast the Patronus.
She comes running afterward, asking what he had done, and then he says, "I saved us. I just saved your skin, my skin, and Sirius's, Sirius." On the other hand, in the movie, he's hiding in the West Tower, right? In the highest tower of the West Wing. In the book, he's hiding in Flitwick's office. And then they go flying with Buckbeak to the window. Hermione used Alohomora to open it, much more discreet than using Bombarda in the cell. So then they get Sirius out of Flitwick's office. Then, when they're going back to the infirmary, which in the movie, they just run back, right? The clock is chiming and all. It's a really cool scene, by the way, but there's a difference. They run into some obstacles along the way, like Peeves, and they have to hide and all that.
And they hear Snape saying that he hoped Dumbledore wouldn't make things difficult, asking if Sirius was going to get the Dementor's kiss right away.
And Fudge says he was eager to report things to the Daily Prophet, because this whole thing with Sirius was pretty embarrassing and all. And that the Daily Prophet would probably want to interview Snape, would want to interview Harry, so Harry could say how Snape saved him anyway. And then, when they're hiding there to go back to the infirmary, they run into, well, not run into, they hide from Peeves, because he was laughing, happy about everything that was happening. And then they arrive, with Dumbledore closing the door, just like in the movie, right? And then they tell him everything that happened. And, unlike in the movie, where Dumbledore pretends not to know, when they say, "Oh, we did it," he says, "What?" It makes it seem like Dumbledore didn't know what had happened, that he didn't know what was going on. But Dumbledore did know. Yes.
He even talks about Buckbeak, about saving Buckbeak, saying that more than one innocent life will be saved.
Because he knew that Buckbeak had escaped, because he was there at Hagrid's, that Buckbeak had escaped and hadn't been killed. And then, when he talks about going back in time, they save Buckbeak, you know? So he knew, then said, "Great that you managed it now." Harry replied, "Sirius and Buckbeak are already gone." Dumbledore added, "Looks like you two are as well." Based on what I heard, they vanished from the hospital wing, and then they came in. Dumbledore locked the door and demanded the Dementors be removed from Hogwarts. And Fudge even says that he might send dragons, and Dumbledore says that Hagrid would really like that. There's also a moment there, a glimpse of Snape's hatred, when he comes in accusing Harry, saying that it was Harry who was involved in Sirius's escape. And Fudge says, "That's completely crazy. He was locked in here. We left just 10 minutes ago. There was no way." And then Dumbledore asks Madame Pomfrey. She says that they didn't leave, that they really were there and all. And then Snape says it had something to do with Harry. Yeah, that the minister didn't know Harry, didn't know Potter. He could do things anyway. And then the minister says, "Hey Dumbledore, I think you need to take a closer look at this professor's temperament and all, you know?" The next day, the trio leaves the infirmary, and the school was practically empty, because the students had gone to Hogsmeade again. But they didn't want to. They chose to stay, and then they started talking about the events of the previous night. They meet Hagrid, and Hagrid.
He says that Snape told the students that Lupin was a werewolf, right? Snape told the Slytherin students that Lupin was a werewolf.
Frustrated that he hadn't gotten the glory of capturing Sirius there, because Dumbledore convinced Fudge that Lupin helped, he was trying to save Harry.
Snape tells the Slytherin students Lupin is a werewolf, and then Harry goes to see Lupin, right? We have that closing scene of the movie, where Lupin says that Harry's father's animagus form was a stag, right? He asks about Harry's Patronus, and then Harry explains, and then he says, "It was the same form as your father's." That's not in the movie. The scene with Lupin's office and the professor leaving, saying goodbye, that's not in the movie either, right? There's only Lupin leaving. Actually, out of all the movies, this is the ending that leaves me with the biggest ache in my heart. You know, I really feel sorry for Lupin there, and it gives me a huge feeling of emptiness. Anyway, I feel really sorry for him. And then, he leaves, right? Lupin leaves, Dumbledore stays there, and Dumbledore has a conversation with Harry, where Harry says it was no use, that Pettigrew escaped, and he talks about the prophecy that Trelawney made there, divination tests, and Dumbledore says that Harry sparing Wormtail's life could be beneficial in the future. And it really was, right?
Anyway, this part with Dumbledore isn't in the movie. It's Lupin who says it, right? That it made all the difference in the world and so on. And in the book, it's Dumbledore. Then, still in the book, all the students have all sorts of theories about how Sirius Black escaped.
Each one crazier than the last, none of them close to what really happened. And Draco was furious because Buckbeak had escaped. Like, he and his father didn't get what they wanted, which was rare, right? Because they have money, they always get everything. Money, influence. Hermione gives the Time Turner back to Minerva and drops Muggle studies and divination. This isn't shown. Ron invites Harry to the Quidditch World Cup. When they're there, at the very end, packing their bags to go home, Ron says, "Hey, in the summer there's going to be the Quidditch World Cup. You could come with us. Dad always gets great seats and all that." So, is the book already hinting that there will be the cup? In the next book? In the movie, they don't mention that on the Hogwarts Express. A cool part is when they're returning, Harry receives a letter from Sirius, who says, "I got the Firebolt. I sent Crookshanks with a purchase order and withdrew the money from the Black family vault, right? I'm hiding. Everything's fine with me and Buckbeak." And then, he sends the little owl as a gift to Ron.
He says, "Ah, Ron, you can keep it because I know I caused you not to have a pet, right?"
"So, you can keep this owl," and then Ron shows it to Buckbeak and Crookshanks and says, "Ah, what do you think? It's really an owl." And Crookshanks purrs, and he says to me, "That's great." And lastly, right, the last thing that's not there now, which is completely cut from the movie, Harry at King's Cross. This return on the Express doesn't happen, right? Harry at King's Cross meets Walter.
And there's something I love about this closing moment of the book, right there at the end of the book. It's that Walter asks what Harry has in his hand, and it was Sirius's letter.
Then Harry says, "Oh, it's my godfather's letter." And Walter says, "You don't have a godfather." Yes, he does. He's a dangerous murderer, a fugitive. He just escaped from prison.
And so, we keep in touch, and he likes to know if I'm happy, if I'm being treated well.
In other words, that's just one more thing to make Walter terrified. I like this Harry. I really like this side of Harry's personality, which unfortunately isn't in the movies, right? Harry has a teasing line or two, but they're much weaker than in the books. Anyway, those were all the most significant changes in the movie Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban compared to the book. I made a general overview, and there was still quite a lot, but it was a pretty broad overview. These are details that people who read the books know, or maybe should know, but don't remember, because it happens, right? There are things you just end up forgetting. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that in the series, these things, at least most of them, are shown on screen, right? It will be really cool to see all of this, and it's an interesting detail.
My main idea in making this video was that I'd already done the first two videos. Things only book readers know from Sorcerer's Stone and Chamber of Secrets.
But they're definitely shorter. But with this one I said, man, I want to make a really broad overview.
First of all, from this point on, the difference between the book and the movie really gets bigger, right?
And I wanted to make this video precisely because it's interesting. Because The Prisoner of Azkaban is considered the best Harry Potter movie by most people.
Most of the answers I get when I ask in polls or things like that are The Prisoner of Azkaban.
Now, you see how the movie is so different from the book. So different, including moments that were changed in ways that even create plot holes, like Harry doing magic outside of school, right? Using Lumos to do his homework. So even with the differences, it's a movie that people consider the best Harry Potter film. So we can keep in mind that the series will have different things that maybe won't be the same as the books, just so we remember that. Look, just because it's different doesn't mean it's bad or worse. In some cases, obviously like Dumbledore's funeral, leaving that out of the movie is unforgivable, right? Still, the movie has several differences from the book, and people consider it worse. What it shows is that Quaran's direction is so good there that it's not change itself that matters, but what changes and how, I think that in Quaran's case, in that movie, in the third movie, the changes were worth it. Because Prisoner of Azkaban really is a wonderful movie.
From a technical standpoint, it's wonderful. It's very well directed. It's a work of art. Anyway, see you in the next episode of The Leaky Cauldron. If you enjoyed the episode, leave a like or comment. If you forgot or missed something, feel free to share it here.
And let's see if this series continues and if I do one about Goblet of Fire. Because I can tell I'm going to suffer a lot, since I've already been recording this video for more than 2 hours. Man, so, I don't know, honestly, I don't know, let's see. This one already took almost a year to come out. The last one, about Chamber of Secrets, came out a year ago. Maybe the next one will come out in another year. See you in the next episode of The Leaky Cauldron, and until then, mischief managed.